Now, for those of you who know London, there's a particularly magical wee street called Denmark Street that I always try and walk down. You might not notice it if you're rushing down the busy thoroughfares on either side, but it's a delicious group of rickety old 18th century houses that just evoke a sense of history and mystery. They've got beautiful old shop fronts. They are linked to the music industry, and you can almost imagine Georgians walking up and down with their periwigs and the tinkle of harpsichords from the first floor drawing rooms. And I'm delighted that Tales from Tin Pan Alley is a documentary feature about the legendary street, and the UK premiere was held at the gala of the Portobello Film Festival in August back there, and it's an important film because it captures a microcosm of a busy city, and it's particularly remarkable that it's managed to survive. Well, the director joins me now in the studio, Henry Scott-Irvine. Henry, very good evening to you.
Nice to be here. Good to be
Thanks for coming in. What got you interested in this street?
Well, what I'd found was that there was still a thriving community there, and it wasn't just the shops, who are very important to London because it's the street of London's guitar shops where people can go and buy musical instruments. But above, behind, below, and in the streets around were all these small independent businesses, creative businesses. You had guitar makers, you had rehearsal spaces, you had recording studios, and all these people interacted. They were in and out of one another's doorways, they were into one another's shops, and they all literally created this kind of community that it seemed that development was going to destroy. And of course, my personal view on property developers is that next to politicians in the main, they're the most dishonest people in the world.
Now, you'd expect me to defend politicians.
I would, of course. But not all. Some politicians are good.
I'm glad you issued the qualification there. Has the street always been associated with music?
No, it hasn't. And this
Remind us where it is, first of all, because remember, this is a network programme, so lots of people don't know London. So where does it sit in London, the fabric of London?
Well, if you were coming to London, you would know Centrepoint or Oxford Street and Oxford Circus. And if you go along Oxford Street, there is Tottenham Court Road. And just down round the corner from there are really the largest developments that Europe has seen. Because of a railway station, Crossrail, and this new line bringing people in and out of London, east to west and west to east, and into the middle, which has cost billions, and it's decimated areas. So if you come to London now, all I would say is, if you see an area that looks like it might be a bomb site that was left from the Second World War, no, it isn't. It's just the redevelopment of London because of Crossrail.
Or Boris Johnson, who smashed his way around London as London Mayor. He had this power to call in planning applications, and of course it was a Labour policy, but it was intended to facilitate grand projets, but he used it to help his developer pals, and every single planning application that went before him, he ordered the demolition of fabulous old areas like Norton Folgate, for example.
Absolutely.
He's most destructive of London mayors, really, but he didn't get his hands on Denmark Street.
He didn't get his hands on Denmark Street, and what we did was try to raise awareness through the media, and Pete Townsend, although Pete thinks that Crossrail is a good thing, and we respect him for that, did an article in the Times for us that kick-started it. And then they tried to close the 12 Bar Club, and then did close the 12 Bar Club. And they made a mistake there, and they were quite vociferous towards me personally, and the group of people that we got together. We were very quick to go to Parliament, talk to Sir Keir Starmer, who is the MP for the area, and of course is known nationally because of Brexit, and also to the council, who claimed to be on side and were a Labour council, and we brought in the chairman of PRS, the deputy chair of PRS, and we brought in people from UK Music, and we went to planning, and we went to the council, and we went to Parliament, and sat down with them and said, we are told that they want to keep the music alive, because that's what they'll always say. We want to keep the spirit of the area. But as you will know, in Norton Folgate, which is this wonderful area to people nationally, where we have all our old markets, which is even older than Denmark Street, They say they'll do this in these areas, and what they do is a great word that Dan Cruikshank, who's in the film, has used is facadism.
Oh yes,
And London
that's
is all
not.
front.
Yeah, exactly. It's a big thing in Glasgow as well, which is you knock down the beautiful building, you just keep the front facade. So they're effectively just stage sets with all the beautiful interiors, all the marble and the mahogany,
All gone.
all gone, smashed down. But people walking past don't notice what's happened because the scaffolding goes up, the building's filleted, and then the scaffolding comes back down again, and nobody knows the carnage inside.
That's
It's the
gone on inside.
laziest of architectural styles. So these buildings are what, 1720s?
Well, there were two buildings in particular that are the oldest buildings in the street, and I got a group of people together, including Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols, where he had a rehearsal space at the back of number 6. We found that the Beatles had owned that building at one point. They'd let it to a group called Badfinger, and then the Sex Pistols moved in 1975. So punk rock, you could say, began there, but it had been a silversmiths before that. More importantly, the building at the front dates back to the 1680s or early 1690s. So we got 6 and 7 grade 2 star listed. It was important for many things. I mean, you could go to number 6 alone and look at the heritage of music there. In the 70s, album covers for Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd were designed there by Hypnosis. They should have turned this building into a living museum.
Like Handel's house.
Yes, absolutely, like Handel's house, which of course has Jimi Hendrix's museum next door. And if you go to America, you could go along the street to number 21. In the basement, there was a recording studio that had been there since the 1950s. Rock and roll had been recorded there. That was there until a couple of years ago, and the back door was accidentally left open, and all the dust from the building site came in, and the guy obviously wasn't going to be able to claim that on his insurance a couple of times, so he had to move. Now, was this deliberate? Was it accidental? We will never know. Builders had to be in and out, but it meant that this studio that could have been if you were in America, you can go to Muscle Shoals or Gold Star Studios, and they still work as functioning studios, but also as museums. And we really missed a trick here. And so we decided we'd make this film. We were very worried that this was all going to evaporate. So I wanted to bring in people who'd recorded there, songwriters, filmmakers, artisans, and historians to keep this story alive and to see what was rapidly disappearing in front of our eyes.
And is it now safe? Are these buildings now protected? You said they were grade 2 star, and it's very hard to knock down a grade 2 star building. So
well, only 3 of them, I think, are grade 2 star.
Is the future of Denmark Street safe?
Well, there was a thing, and we should not go. I won't go too technical on this, but there's a thing called a Section 106. What is a Section 106? Boring jargon term. It means that you can do a deal, that the developers can do a deal with the council, and that is council planning, and they have an agreement in place to protect the music shops at ground floor level. I mean, some of the music shops actually see us as the enemy, because the people who seek to gain the most often like to undermine the people who have really very little to gain, i.e. campaigners who do it voluntarily.
Yeah.
So those shops are there. The Section 106 enabled leases were running out, and they were on to 6-month rolling leases. The shop assistants may not have been aware of that, but it meant that actually their boss or their leaseholder suddenly was on this very short-term contract. You can't go to the bank with a short-term contract, especially under the Landlords and Tenants Act. It means you're not really protected. You can't call your landlord, who also is the developer, and the landlord and the freeholder, any kind of name or any kind of piece of actual factual rationale, because they will just terminate your lease. So the Section 106 gave them the option for a 3-year lease to be signed. Some of them have signed that. What is a concern is that the leases will be a fair rent, and they've given it a very ambiguous term called Tin Pan Alley uses. What does that mean exactly? Is that a fair rent? Well, are they going to double the rent, triple the rent? I mean, what we saw during the period of development was 8 music venues in the St Giles Circus alone close. These were venues that were successful and they were thriving. And we've seen some lies from a former mayor, Ken Livingstone, I think, this is my personal view, and also a new mayor that said they were going to replace the Astoria with a music venue, and what they did there, in fact, is they're putting a theatre for plays.
We'd have to point out that he's not here.
He's not here.
He would no doubt dispute that description.
Yes.
there's two issues, really, isn't there? There's the preservation of the building,
Yes.
and then there's also the preservation of its current use as music shops.
Yes.
Which is the more important of the two, or can they both coexist?
I think they can both coexist. Denmark Street has some of the finest guitar shops in the world. You go to Regent Sounds at number 4. It was a recording studio in the 1960s where the Rolling Stones recorded. Black Sabbath made their first album there. Elton John did demos down there. Crispin Weir, who runs that, has ancient guitars that you would have seen in the 60s, Gretsch's and Rickenbackers and Flying V's, as does No Tom Guitars along the road, where you could buy a guitar that might have been owned by Tom Petty or Jimmy Page. So you have new history within old history.
Absolutely fabulous. If anyone wants to see, I'm sure lots of people do, having heard this discussion, Tales from Tin Pan Alley, where do they get to see it?
The next big screening, well, there's going to be two. July 5th, it's going to show at Southwest Fest in SW1. But more importantly, Julian Temple, the great documentary filmmaker, is going to screen it at Glastonbury 2019 outside a thing called Cineramageddon. If you're at Glastonbury, just head to the largest cinema screen you've ever seen in the world, outdoors, where Tales from Tin Pan Alley will show one night at Glastonbury. And we're really delighted, and thank you to Michael Eavis and to Julian Temple for allowing this.
Sounds absolutely fabulous, and well done on your campaign to save this
Thank you. A pleasure
very
to
important slice of London.
A pleasure to be here, John. Nice to talk
Great
to
to have you. That's Henry Scott-Irvine, who's the director of Tales from Tin Pan Alley. It is 7:25, and you're listening to John Nicholson here on Talk Radio.